My name is Brian Mitchell, and the night I found out my wife had stolen our daughter's college fund, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of bank statements spread out like a losing poker hand. 57 years old, 38 years as a master electrician, just 3 years from my planned retirement, and I couldn't figure out where $15,000 had disappeared to. Diana walked in from her evening yoga class, hair perfect, makeup fresh, not a drop of sweat on her. She took one look at the papers, and her face went white. "What are you doing?" she asked, setting down her designer water bottle. I held up the statement. "Looking for Grace's college money. You know, the fund we've been building for 10 years, it's gone." She stood there in her expensive workout clothes, the kind that cost more than I made in a week when I started in the trade back in 1985. That's when I knew. Not everything, but enough to feel that familiar knot in my stomach. The same one I got when I walked into a job site and saw electrical work that wasn't up to code. It had started 6 months earlier. Diana had been different, distant, critical, always finding fault. The way I loaded the dishwasher, my work boots by the door, the fact that I preferred staying home instead of going to her fancy real estate events. "You're so blue-collar," she'd say, like the calluses on my hands, and the steady paycheck I'd brought home for nearly 4 decades meant nothing. I'd been working electrical systems since I was 19, fresh out of high school, built a solid reputation, earned respect from my crew, and made decent money. Enough to buy this house, support a family, and build something for Grace's future. I'd even started seriously planning my retirement, figured I could step back at 60, maybe do some part-time consulting work, spend more time with Grace before she got too busy with her own life. But suddenly, nothing I did was good enough for Diana. "Look at Jennifer's husband," she'd say, referring to her real estate. "Colleague? He's a surgeon. They just bought a ski chalet in Colorado. And I'm an electrician who keeps the lights on," I'd reply. "Different jobs, different lives." "Exactly," she'd snap back, like I'd proved her point. The changes started small. New clothes, expensive makeup, a gym membership at Elite Fitness Solutions, the most upscale place in town where personal trainers cost more per hour than I charged for electrical work. Then came the late nights, client dinners, networking events, always something that kept her out until 10 or 11 p.m. But that night with the bank statements, everything clicked into place. Diana Mitchell, my wife of 12 years, had been stealing from our daughter. "Where is it?" I asked. She crossed her arms defensively. "I needed it for business expenses. The real estate market is extremely competitive." Business expenses. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through credit card statements. $800 at that boutique downtown. $200 for spa treatments. $2,500 for something called Elite Fitness Solutions. I looked up at her. "That's not business, Diana. That's you spending our daughter's future on yourself." Her face hardened. "You don't understand what it takes to succeed in my industry. I have to look professional, maintain relationships." "With who? Clients? Colleagues?" She paused. "People who matter in this business. People who matter. Not me, apparently. Not Grace. Not the retirement fund I'd been carefully building, planning to have enough saved so Grace wouldn't need student loans, and I could finally rest after 38 years of crawling through attics and dealing with live wires. Grace came down the stairs, her footsteps soft on the hardwood I'd installed myself. 16 years old now, honor roll student, planning to study computer science. She had my practical nature and her mother's intelligence. This kid had grown up watching me troubleshoot electrical problems methodically, and she'd learned to apply that same systematic thinking to everything. She took one, looked at the bank papers, and sat down across from me. "How bad is it?" she asked simply. Diana jumped in before I could answer. "It's fine, honey. Just some temporary cash flow issues." Grace looked at me, waiting for the truth. "The college fund's gone," I said simply. Grace nodded slowly, unsurprised. Not angry or panicked, just tired, like she'd been expecting this. "I have something to show you," Grace said quietly, pulling out her phone. "I've been documenting things." "Documenting what?" Diana's voice got sharp. Grace began swiping through screenshots. Bank transactions, credit card bills, then photos. Diana's car parked outside Elite Fitness Solutions when she was supposedly showing houses across town. Diana at expensive restaurants with a man I didn't recognize. Young, fit, wearing a cocky smile. "I started noticing things about 2 months ago," Grace explained steadily. "Mom would say she was showing houses in Riverside, but her location sharing showed her somewhere else. Then the new clothes, the extra time getting ready, the way she'd smile at her phone." She continued scrolling. "I started taking screenshots of the banking app when I borrowed Mom's phone. Gas station purchases near the gym when she was supposed to be showing properties across town. Restaurant charges way above her usual client budget when she claimed she was eating alone." "His name is Trevor Kane," Grace said, landing on a photo that made my blood run cold. "Personal trainer at Elite Fitness Solutions, 28 years old. Mom's been seeing him for 4 months. The room went completely silent. Diana's face cycled through emotions. Surprise, anger, then almost relief, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. The mask she'd been wearing finally slipped completely. "Grace, you don't understand," Diana said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Adults have complicated relationships." "I understand perfectly," Grace cut her off, steel in her voice. "You're having an affair. You stole my college money to impress your boyfriend. And now you're trying to gaslight Dad and me. Don't talk to me like that. I'm your mother." Grace stood up slowly. "No. You're the woman who married my dad when I was 6. He's the one who taught me to ride a bike, helped with homework every night, showed up for every school event. You're just someone who lives here and spends our money." Diana's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "He's not even your real father." The words hung in the air like smoke. Grace went very still. "What did you say?" "Brian's not your biological father," Diana repeated, gaining confidence. "Your real dad left before you were born. Some musician who couldn't handle responsibility. Brian just stepped in. Played house. But he's not family, Grace. Not really." I watched my daughter's face crumble and rebuild itself in about 3 seconds. Then she laughed. Not bitter, just genuinely amused. "You think that matters?" Grace shook her head. "You think 10 years of bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes mean nothing because we don't share DNA? You think the man who taught me to wire outlets and change tires isn't my real dad?" She faced Diana fully. "You want to know what I think?" "I think you're jealous. Jealous that I love him more than you. Jealous that he's a better parent than you'll ever be." Diana's composure cracked. "You ungrateful little—" "Enough." My voice carried the authority of 38 years managing crews. "Don't talk to her like that." Diana spun on me, flushed with panic. "You're nothing, Brian. A 57-year-old electrician who's never been anywhere, never done anything important. You think Grace won't realize that when she gets to college? You think she'll want to come home to some washed-up blue-collar nobody who can't even afford to send her to a decent school?" The words should have hurt, but instead they made everything clear. This wasn't about money or affairs. This was about Diana's belief that what I did, who I was, wasn't enough. That 38 years of honest work, of building something, solid wasn't valuable because it didn't come with a 6-figure salary. "You think this is your family?" Diana's voice got desperate. "I can take her away anytime I want. You have no legal rights. She's not your blood." Grace stepped closer to me. "You're wrong about everything, Mom. But especially about him." That's when I made my decision. Not dramatically, just quietly, like switching off an overloaded circuit breaker. Grace, go pack a bag. We're staying at your Uncle Kevin's tonight. You can't just take her, Diana said, face going white. I'll call the police. Go ahead, I said, gathering the bank statements. Grace is 16, old enough to choose, and after what she just showed us, any reasonable officer will understand why she doesn't feel safe here. You stole her future, Grace said quietly. You lied for months. You're trying to take away the only stable parent she's ever had. The next morning, I sat in the office of Patricia Collins, a family law attorney Kevin's wife had recommended. Patricia was about 60, with silver hair and sharp eyes that had clearly seen every kind of family crisis. Her office was lined with law books that looked actually used rather than decorative. Mr. Mitchell, she said after I'd explained the situation and shown her Grace's evidence, I need to ask directly, do you want to fight for custody of Grace? She's my daughter, I said simply. Has been for 10 years. Biology doesn't change that. Patricia nodded. The evidence Grace collected is remarkable. Bank records, photographs, GPS data. She's built a case against her mother's fitness as a parent. But I need to warn you. Diana will fight dirty. She'll claim you're manipulating Grace, using her against her mother. Courts can be sympathetic to biological mothers. What are our chances? Better than you think. Grace is 16, so her preferences carry significant weight. The financial evidence shows clear mismanagement. And the affair, combined with financial impropriety, creates a pattern of poor judgment. Patricia leaned forward. Has Diana been working to alienate Grace from you? Telling her you're not her real father, undermining your authority? I thought about the previous night. As of last night, yes. That's parental alienation. Courts take it very seriously, especially with step-parents who've been primary caregivers. The fact that you've been Grace's father figure since she was 6 works strongly in your favor. She pulled out a legal pad. Tell me about your long-term plans. Diana's lawyer will argue you're too old, that Grace needs a younger, more dynamic parent. I'm 57, planning to retire at 60, I said. I've been saving specifically so Grace won't need student loans. My plan was to do part-time consulting work, be more available as she finishes high school and starts college. I want to be there when she needs guidance transitioning to adulthood. Patricia made notes. That's actually perfect. Shows planning, stability, putting Grace's needs first. Diana's impulsive. Spending versus your careful retirement planning tells a story about priorities. Over the next week, Diana escalated exactly as Patricia had predicted. She filed for divorce, immediately moved Trevor into our house, and demanded full custody plus supervised visitation for me, claiming I was emotionally unstable and had kidnapped Grace. But Diana had underestimated Grace. While she spun stories about manipulative stepfathers and rebellious teenagers, Grace calmly organized evidence and prepared to tell her truth. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early March, 3 weeks away. As we sat in Patricia's office going over strategy, I realized everything I'd built over 38 years. My reputation, my relationship with Grace, my sense of who I was about to be tested in a way no electrical job had prepared me for. Mr. Mitchell, Patricia said as we wrapped up, Diana's lawyer will argue you only want custody to hurt her, to get revenge for the affair. How do you respond? I thought, about Grace, about 10 years of being there, showing up, choosing to love this kid every single day, about the retirement plans I'd made around being available for her during these crucial years. I don't want revenge, I said. I want my daughter to have the chance to become who she's supposed to be, and I want to be there to help her do it. The custody hearing was held on a gray Tuesday in March. Diana showed up in a $2,000 suit, looking every inch the successful professional she claimed to be. Trevor sat in the back row checking his phone, apparently bored by proceedings that would determine whether his girlfriend kept custody of her daughter. Judge Harrison was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that cataloged every detail. She'd been on the family court bench for 15 years, Patricia had told me. Nothing would surprise her. Grace testified first, walking to the witness stand with calm confidence. She looked directly at the judge as she was sworn in. Grace, Patricia began, "Can you tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Mitchell?" "He's my dad," Grace said simply. "He married my mom when I was 6, and he's been my father ever since. He taught me to ride a bike, helped with homework, came to every school event. When I think of my father, I think of him." "And why did you start collecting evidence about your mother's activities?" Grace straightened slightly. "Because I could see what was happening. Mom was having an affair, spending money we didn't have, and I was afraid she'd blame my dad when it fell apart. I wanted to document the truth." Diana's lawyer, Richard Hoffman, tried to paint Grace as a troubled teenager, manipulated by an older stepfather seeking revenge. "Grace, isn't it true that you were angry at your mother for having a social life? That you resented her success?" Grace's answer was perfect, delivered with calm logic. "Mr. Hoffman, my mom wasn't having a social life. Married people who secretly date others are having affairs. I wasn't angry about her success. I was concerned she was using my college fund to finance personal relationships. But you wanted to live with Mr. Mitchell because he was more permissive?" "No, sir. My dad isn't permissive. He's consistent. He shows up when he says he will. He keeps promises. Those aren't teenage preferences. Those are basic human values." When Diana took the stand, she played the victim with Oscar-worthy performance. She claimed I was controlling and financially abusive, that I'd turned Grace against her out of spite. "I work 60 hours a week building my career," Diana said, dabbing at her eyes. "Brian resented my success. He wanted me satisfied with his blue-collar lifestyle. But I have bigger dreams." Patricia let her talk, dig the hole deeper. Then she brought out Grace's evidence. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain these GPS records showing you spent 14 hours at Elite Fitness Solutions last month? Are you selling real estate at a gym?" Diana's face flushed. "I was networking. Many clients are fitness-oriented." "And these text messages to Trevor Kane?" Patricia read from Grace's screenshots. Quote, "Can't wait to get away from the old man and his boring life. You make me feel young again." End quote. The courtroom went silent, except for Diana's sharp intake of breath. Patricia continued methodically. "Can you explain why you withdrew $15,000 from Grace's college fund without your husband's knowledge? It was a temporary loan." "For business expenses." Business expenses. Patricia pulled out credit card statements. $800 at boutique stores, $1,200 for spa treatments, $2,500 for personal training, $22,000 total over 6 months, while claiming you couldn't afford Grace's SAT prep courses. Diana tried to explain, but each answer made her look worse. The expensive dinners weren't client meetings. The networking events were hotel trips with Trevor. The professional development was spa weekends. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Harrison interrupted, "are you asking this court to believe that stealing your daughter's college fund to finance an affair represents responsible parenting? I was going to pay it back." "When? After you sold the family home without your husband's knowledge?" Patricia had documentation of that, too. Real estate listings Diana had prepared without my signature, meetings about quick sales for cash. The final blow came when Patricia played an audio recording Grace had made, Diana talking to Trevor about post-divorce plans. "Once I get rid of Brian and get full custody, I'll have access to Grace's inheritance from my parents. We can finally live the life we deserve." Diana's face went white as her own voice filled the courtroom. She looked around desperately, searching for escape. "That's out of context," she stammered. "I didn't mean—" "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Harrison said, her voice cutting through the courtroom, "I've heard enough. The judge recessed for lunch, and Patricia, Grace, and I sat in a nearby diner picking at sandwiches none of us really wanted. Grace seemed calm, but I could see tension in her shoulders. "How do you think it went?" I asked Patricia. "Better than I hoped. Diana's testimony was a disaster, and the evidence speaks for itself. But until we hear the judge's decision." When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Harrison looked directly at Diana before speaking. "Mrs. Mitchell, in 15 years on this bench, I've seen many parents make mistakes. Financial stress, relationship problems, poor judgment. These are human failings that can often be addressed with counseling and supervised visitation." My heart sank. This sounded like the beginning of a compromise ruling. However, Judge Harrison continued, "What I witnessed today goes far beyond poor judgment. You have systematically stolen from your daughter's educational fund to finance an affair. You have attempted to sell the family home without proper authorization. You have engaged in deliberate parental alienation by weaponizing Grace's parentage against the man who has raised her for 10 years. Diana's lawyer whispered something urgent in her ear, but she wasn't listening. Her face cycled through disbelief and rising panic. "Most disturbing, you have shown no remorse for these actions. Instead, you have blamed everyone else. Your husband for not supporting your success, your daughter for being manipulated, and this court for not understanding your situation." Judge Harrison picked up her gavel with deliberate precision. "My ruling is as follows. Temporary primary custody is awarded to Mr. Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell is granted supervised visitation pending completion of financial counseling and family therapy. Mrs. Mitchell is ordered to immediately cease any attempts to sell or encumber family property. A financial audit will determine the full extent of misappropriated funds, which must be repaid with interest." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Diana shot to her feet, composure completely shattered. "This is ridiculous. He's not even her real father." Judge Harrison's eyes hardened. "Mrs. Mitchell, sometimes the most real fathers are the ones who choose to stay. Court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations, but all I could hear was my heartbeat thundering. Then, cutting through the noise like a clear signal, I heard something small and familiar. "Daddy." I turned to see Grace standing with Patricia's paralegal. Her eyes were wet, but her smile was the real thing. Bright, relieved, absolutely certain. She ran to me and wrapped her arms around my waist, holding tight like she was afraid I might disappear. "I knew you wouldn't leave me," she whispered against my jacket. I couldn't speak. I just held her while watching Diana storm out with her lawyer chasing after her. Trevor had already disappeared, apparently smart enough to realize his meal ticket had been canceled. "We won," Grace said, pulling back to look at me. "We actually won." "We told the truth," I corrected gently. "That's all we ever had to do." The weeks following the hearing were strangely peaceful. Diana moved out. Temporarily, she claimed, though we all knew it was permanent. She rented a small apartment across town and began the supervised visitation schedule, though she rarely showed up. Grace would wait by the window for the first few visits, then gradually stopped expecting her mother to arrive. Trevor, as it turned out, had been more interested in Diana's fantasy lifestyle than her post-divorce reality. Within a month, he'd moved on to another older woman with better financial prospects. "I'm not proud that it makes me happy," Grace admitted as we sat at the kitchen table going over her college applications. "But I can't help it. He used her the same way she used us." "That's human nature," I told her. "Feeling satisfied when someone gets their comeuppance doesn't make you a bad person. Acting on those feelings destructively would." The financial audit Patricia had requested revealed the full extent of Diana's deception. Beyond the $15,000 college fund, she had accumulated nearly $30,000 in credit card debt, most spent maintaining her affair. The house had been refinanced without my knowledge, and she had attempted to withdraw money from Grace's trust fund from her grandparents. Your mother was living in a fantasy, Patricia explained during a follow-up meeting. She believed she could maintain this lifestyle indefinitely. It's not uncommon. People convince themselves their wants are actually needs. By summer, Diana had stopped showing up for supervised visits entirely. Grace received a card on her 17th birthday, postmarked from Phoenix, no return address, generic message about thinking of you. Grace read it once and threw it away without comment. "Do you miss her?" I asked one evening as we worked in the garage, Grace learning to change brake pads while I supervised. "I miss the mom I thought I had when I was little," Grace said, concentrating on the brake caliper. "The one who read me stories and made Halloween. Costumes. But I don't miss the person she became. People change, kiddo. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. The important thing is that you don't let someone else's choices define who you become." Grace started her senior year that fall with newfound confidence. She'd always been a good student, but now she approached everything with methodical precision, understanding that preparation and evidence mattered more than wishful thinking. Her college applications were masterpieces. She researched programs, visited campuses, applied for every scholarship she could find. When acceptance letters started arriving, she had options I'd never dreamed possible. Full academic scholarship to the State University Engineering program, she announced one evening, waving the letter like a victory flag, with housing, meal plan, and book stipend. "That's my girl," I said, and meant every word. We spent the summer rebuilding more than just Grace's education fund. I taught her advanced electrical work, how to wire outlets, install ceiling fans, troubleshoot complex problems. Not because I expected her to become an electrician, but because I wanted her to understand there was dignity in working with your hands, in solving practical problems, in building something that would last. "You know what I figured out?" Grace said one afternoon, as we rewired the basement workshop. "The difference between you and Mom isn't money or education or social status. It's that you build things up and she tears them down." Moving Grace into her dorm room the following August was harder than I'd expected. Not because I was losing her, she called twice a week and came home for Sunday dinners, but because it marked the end of an era. The little girl who used to hand me screwdrivers had become a young woman who could diagnose electrical problems and explain complex engineering concepts. "Thanks for choosing me, Dad," she said as we finished setting up her room. "Every single day for 11 years, you chose me. That means everything." Standing in that dorm parking lot, watching my daughter walk toward her future with confidence and purpose, I realized something important about revenge. For months, I'd been focused on winning in court, on proving Diana wrong. But real victory wasn't about defeating Diana. It was about Grace becoming who she was meant to be despite her mother's failures. 3 years later, Grace is thriving in her engineering program, working part-time for a local contractor doing electrical estimates, and dating a young man who reminds me of myself at that age. Steady, hard-working, more interested in building something real than chasing fantasies. She still calls twice a week from her dorm room, not because she has to, but because she wants to share her life with someone who's earned the privilege of being her father. I'm 60 now, officially retired as of last month. The retirement party my crew threw me was something to remember. 38 years in the trade, and I walked away with my pension intact, my house paid off, and Grace's college fund fully restored, and then some. The part-time consulting work I'd planned turned out to be more rewarding than I expected. Teaching younger electricians, helping solve complex problems, staying involved without the daily grind of crawling through attics and dealing with emergency calls at 2 a.m. Diana sends a Christmas card every year, always from a different city, always with a different last name. This past year it came from Tampa, signed Diana Rodriguez, Grace reads them politely and files them away. There's no anger anymore, just indifference, which somehow seems more final than hatred ever could. Last month, I ran into Jennifer, Diana's former real estate colleague, at the hardware store where I was picking up parts for a small wiring job. She told me Diana was working as a receptionist for a dental office, her real estate license long since expired. She asks about Grace sometimes, Jennifer said carefully. Wonders how she's doing in college. Grace is doing fine, I replied. She's exactly where she's supposed to be. The house feels different now, quieter but not empty. Peaceful in a way it never was when Diana lived here. I've converted her old office into a workshop where I build custom furniture in my spare time. Grace helped me design a computer desk for her dorm room, applying engineering principles to make it both functional and beautiful. Watching her sketch out load calculations and stress points, I realized she'd taken the practical problem-solving approach I'd taught her and elevated it to something far beyond what I could have imagined. You know what's funny? Grace said during one of our phone calls last week. My engineering professor was explaining structural integrity, how buildings need strong foundations to withstand stress. All I could think about was you, how you spent 11 years being my foundation so I could withstand Mom's attempts to tear everything down. Grace's engineering project this semester involves designing more efficient electrical systems for low-income housing. When she explained it to me over dinner last Sunday, her eyes lit up the same way they did when she was 6, and I'd let her help me install a ceiling fan. The kid who used to hand me screwdrivers was now designing systems that would help families save money on their electric bills. I want to do work that matters, she told me, like you did. Making sure people have safe, reliable power in their homes. That's not just a job, it's a responsibility. Standing in my workshop last weekend, surrounded by the tools I'd used for nearly 4 decades, I thought about legacy and what it really means. Diana had been right about one thing. I never made 6 figures, never bought the big house in Riverside Oaks, never joined the country club. But watching Grace explain load calculations to her boyfriend, seeing her confidence and integrity and determination to build something meaningful with her life, I understood that everything I'd taught her by example had taken root and grown into something extraordinary. She called me yesterday with news that made my chest swell with pride. Dad, I got the internship with the power company. They want me to work on their rural electrification project this summer, bringing reliable power to areas that have been overlooked for decades. That's incredible, kiddo. Your grandfather would have been proud. He spent his whole career working utility lines. I know. I told them about him in my interview, about how 3 generations of our family have worked to keep the lights on for other families. After we hung up, I sat in my workshop thinking about that conversation. 3 generations. Grace was already thinking beyond herself, beyond her own success, to the work that needed doing and the legacy she wanted to build. A few weeks ago, Grace brought her boyfriend Kevin home for dinner. Nice kid, studying mechanical engineering, planning to work in renewable energy systems. As I watched him help Grace wire a new outlet in her old bedroom, I saw something that made me smile. He held the flashlight steady without being asked, handed her tools before she requested them, and listened carefully when she explained the safety protocols I'd taught her years ago. Your dad's amazing, I heard him tell her later as they worked. My dad's a lawyer, makes good money, but he never taught me anything practical. You're lucky to have someone who actually showed you how to build things, how to solve real problems. I know, Grace replied simply. He's the best man I've ever known. As I've gotten older and had time to reflect on everything that happened, I've learned that revenge isn't about getting even or making people pay for their mistakes and betrayals. Real revenge is living well and thriving despite those who tried to tear you down. It's choosing integrity over convenience, truth over comfort, and genuine love over selfish fear every single day, without exception. Sometimes the very best possible way to defeat someone who tries to destroy your family is simply to be the stable, loving family they never could be or understand. Diana wanted to take Grace away from me by claiming I wasn't her real father. Instead, she proved that being a real father has nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choosing to love someone unconditionally, day after day, year after year. And in the end, that choice, to keep showing up, to keep building, to keep choosing love over bitterness, that's the only revenge that truly matters. Because when all the noise fades away, and you're left with what you've actually built with your own hands and heart, you realize that a man's true legacy isn't measured in bank accounts or job titles, but in the character of the people who call him father. The greatest victory any man can achieve isn't defeating his enemies, but raising children who become better people than he ever dreamed possible. Children who carry his values forward into a world that desperately needs more builders and fewer destroyers.